What made Erwin Rommel incredible is that the man understood speed. He understood the power and mobility of the panzers, of these new mechanized units that would take center stage in the theater of the Second World War. And listen, there's a lot you can argue about the man. Maybe he wasn't the greatest strategist, or maybe his understanding of logistics was flawed, but I think most would agree in saying that at a tactical level, he was a genius. And the signature tactic of his that we're going to discuss today, I call it the desert shuffle. And the most interesting thing about the shuffle is that it is strikingly similar to the feigned flight tactic used by Mongol horse archers. And you want to know why they're so similar? It's because Rommel actually studied the Mongol art of war. He studied the Khan's invasion of the Tanguts and the Khwarezmians, of Subadai's European campaigns against the Russian principalities and Eastern European states, and he brought their genius to the modern battlefield. Specifically, the early 1940s, when the Wehrmacht was wrecking the British forces across the desert landscapes of Libya and Egypt. And for both sides, victory in North Africa was essential in maintaining control of the Mediterranean, along with all of its precious oil, and having access to the vital strategic waterway of the Suez Canal. Now, at its core, the Desert Shuffle involved 3 steps. Step 1, engage. Step 2, pull back. Step 3, counterpunch. And what would happen is, first the German panzers that we have represented here by these rectangles, first the German panzers here would engage the British forces, who were often a mix of infantry brigades and armor regiments. And after a brief period of skirmishing between the two, the panzers would appear to fall back into disarray and begin retreating, drawing the British tanks after them. However, in doing so, the British would get separated from their support groups and infantry units, and in the pursuit, the panzers would lead them right into the range of hidden anti-tank guns, which would unleash a devastating barrage onto the isolated British units. And whilst this tactic may look deceptively simple, there's actually a lot you can learn about modern warfare by answering 2 key questions about the Desert Shuffle. The first is, why did Rommel use this tactic? And the second, what is it that made it so damn effective? And as you'll see towards the end, these 2 points here are actually beautifully linked together. Now, the reason that Rommel used the Desert Shuffle stems from his philosophy on tank warfare. For the German commander, it was the artillery's job to deal with tanks, specifically the 88mm Pak anti-tank gun, which had the necessary range and firepower to deal with British tanks at an incredible distance. Its powerful shots able to penetrate a Matilda II's thick armor from up to 2 kilometers away. In his opinion, a tank's best use on the battlefield, its most effective role here, was as a shock unit, whose purpose was to exploit weak spots in the enemy's defenses and smash through them quickly. This was Rommel's other signature move, where he'd repeatedly use his panzers on these wide flanking maneuvers to try and surround and cut off the British vanguard forces, but that's for another video. What's important here is that he believed in using the right tool for the right job, crafting the Desert Shuffle to maximize the potential of each of his units. Now, to answer the question of what made this tactic effective involves considering the nature of the Allied units, that is, their limitations, and more importantly, how the various pieces interacted with one another. For the British, their cruisers and heavy tanks were armed with 2-pound anti-tank guns that are quite effective at taking out panzers, but only at 500 yards or less. Anything less than that, and the damage they'd cause was superficial. So for the British armed forces to deal damage, they had to come in close. Okay, but surely they had other means of taking out German tanks, right? And they sure did. The other weapon in the British arsenal that could deal with the Panzer was the 25-pound artillery howitzer that could wreck a German tank from long range. But here's the key problem. The armor regiment that very often led the attack from the front, they had no artillery with them and had to rely on the support groups and infantry regiments that carried the howitzers to do the damage. So during an offensive maneuver, when these 2 sides were meant to work together, the Desert Shuffle took advantage of the difference in speed between the British units and took advantage of their lack in communication and pulled them apart to defeat them in detail. And whilst the shuffle would occur multiple times across many battles, there is an engagement that took place in the British operation known as Battleaxe that highlights the Desert Shuffle's efficacy and ingenuity. The main goal of Battleaxe was to relieve the Allied forces that were under siege in the Libyan port city of Tobruk, which is somewhere over there for our case. In moving towards the city, the British forces first had to clear the Germans in the way, who are here. So at Fort Capuzzo, which I'm going to have represented here by this red block, at Fort Capuzzo near the Libyan Egyptian border, the 7th Royal Tank Regiment, presented here, which was mostly comprised of the Matilda II tanks and the 22nd Guards Brigade, represented here by these soldiers and this artillery, move up for the job. The 7th Regiment arrives at the fort by midday ahead of the Guards Brigade and engages the German infantry at Capuzzo. So Rommel sends in the 1st Battalion of the 8th Panzer Regiment to relieve his men. And after some light skirmishing, the Panzers appear to fall backwards, luring the 7th Regiment into chasing after them. But in doing so, they fall for Rommel's trap, leaving the 22nd Guards Brigade far behind and running into a concealed line of anti-tank guns, and bam! They knock out 5 Matildas and damage 4 more. And what's really interesting to note is that the shuffle was the perfect tactic for the Second World War. It's a conflict being waged on such a massive scale, far different to anything humans had fought before. For the first time, you have these giant armies trying to integrate all these uniquely different combat arms to achieve multiple objectives, and they just didn't coordinate effectively. And what the Desert Shuffle did so well was exploit this combined arms problem, this lack of cohesion, by stretching out the British forces, taking advantage of the weak communication between the armor and the infantry and the support groups, taking advantage of their difference in speed, and handing the Desert Fox some incredible victories on the tank battle score sheet. Thank you so much for watching. If you can like and subscribe as always, I do appreciate it so much. Feedback is always appreciated as well. Thank you, and I'll see you all next video.